Alright everyone, welcome back to another Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes video with Fat Phil, and today we're going to be talking about 5 farms, teams that I would be delaying right now. Let's be very clear before we get into the list. Delaying does not mean you shouldn't farm them at all. It just means that I think there are better things to do right now in your account, and so I picked a bunch of things that kind of are a wide array of teams that, and I'll kind of tell you when they fit into your farming path, and that way you don't have to ask that question of when do you do it. I'll kind of give you that mindset, that time frame of, hey, this is when it makes sense. So let's first and foremost thank our channel members for continuing to support me, even though I have been extremely absent lately. Very much appreciate you guys. Thank you for putting your faith in me. We're working. It's been a long journey, guys. Thank you again. Keeping the faith. I love you all. May the force be with you. Let's get into the list. Alright, so the first farm on this list is Dr. Aphra. And I just feel that there are better uses for your gear. I think she's probably the last thing you should get out of the journey guide. I would get everything else out of the journey guide before her. I just think she unfortunately is so dependent on her datacron, and that poses a lot of problems for her because without it, she's decent, but if you compare her usefulness to someone like Bo or Cal or Jar Jar or Starkiller or Grand Inquisitor, it's, she's not comparable. And that's where I think she loses out. And like Hondo is class. Like I absolutely love Hondo, but like the Sana Staros team, you need to do some additional investing in. You've got to have the extra droids for Aphra. And then the other thing that I would say here is everybody's going to say, oh, well, it's only 4 Relic 5s, and she can use her in territory battles. Well, if you're going to use her in TB, you've got to invest additional relics into her and her team to get them to Relic 7. So I don't like sitting there saying, hey, she's good in TB. It's kind of like saying, and we'll get to something else like this, but it'd be like saying that Jabba has a Territory War Omicron and a Grand Arena Omicron. I'm only willing to let that slide if you're actually using those Omicrons. You know what I mean? That like, if you're gonna keep Aphra at Relic 5, you can't claim she's good in territory battles. So I just want to make sure that's clear. I just think there's better ways to utilize your gear right now. Probably the last thing you should be getting in the journey guide. And use me as an example. I'm competing in, the low end of Kyber 1 without her. All right, next is Imperial Troopers, the Veers Troopers. Now this one, again, a delay. I think you want to build this team and, keep them at lower gear. Now, obviously, Piet is going to be a Relic 8 for Executor, but for the rest of the team, you probably get them to like gear 11, maybe gear 12 for like range and Veers. Moff Gideon and Dark Trooper, obviously a little bit harder there because they do require a lot more Kyrotech, but I'd kind of keep them on the lower end of the gear because what you can do is use them as a turn meter train. That early on, you're not going to need a Relic 8-5 or, Relic Dark Trooper to beat a lot of the teams. You just need the turn meter, right? As long as you can run a turn meter train, get it going, you're going to be able to do perfectly fine. And that's why Range Trooper is so important, is that he is going to give out additional buffs to get that rolling, and then you're going to take all those additional turns with Moff Gideon, Piet, and the Emperor's Trap just kind of starts rolling and rolling, and then it doesn't matter, they never get another turn. And the reason I say low gear at first is because once you get this team, I think you start working on an Iden team and put your relics here first. Iden Versio to me is a far superior character, a far superior team than the Veers Troopers. Now this is for a couple of reasons. Number one, you can set her on defense. Now some people will say, oh, well that's food for Wampa. I can tell you in Kyber 1, I have been very selective on which Idens I take Wampa up against because a lot of players, what they're doing is they're setting Range Trooper in with Iden Versio, and it's basically a gamble that if you get enough assists in that fight, they will actually kill Wampa simply because they're assisting constantly, they're dealing all this extra damage. Some of the Datacrons recently have been very good for that for Iden Versio, so I very much think that the Iden team, I mean that's just one example, right, but you can even set Iden on defense with General Grievous, Mon Mothma, kind of bait out Wampa somewhere, and then potentially have your opponent fail. But I think the Iden team, invest your relics there, and you could kind of pick those Imperial Troopers that you'll use with Dark Trooper Moff Gideon, and that way when you do get him, you've got your Imperial Remnant team, and then you can kind of rebuild that Iden team based on what you need. But the Iden Versio, guys, is just, she's so good. absolutely a team that is just so clear. And so then with your other troopers, I'd say you kind of relic them as you see fit, but kind of just think, hey, I used to be able to beat these teams. Now I'm not as fast as them, or I'm not dealing enough damage. And that's when you start upping the gear, right? It's this weird thing where I feel we get so afraid to keep something at lower gear. Like with my Star Killer, I had to bump him to Relic 7 as I noticed he was failing against Rey more and more often. So that'd be the same thing with your troopers, that if you're finding less and less uses for them and they're at gear, 9 or something, maybe up their gear levels a little bit and see if you're getting more use out of them. So it's a very strange place, because it's not like, oh, at this GP do it. Just when you're noticing that their ability to help you is dropping off, that's when I would, gear these guys up. But I definitely would put your relics on the Iden team first. I just think we oftentimes give Veers, we elevate him to this level of, oh, he beats this, he beats this, he beats this, he beats this. But, that top 5% of what he does, yes, is better than what Iden does. But that middle, what Iden can do here is better than what Veers can do, just in my personal opinion. So that's why I like your relics on Iden first. Next is Tuskens. I think this is a very good faction. They're just not good enough to farm them before you have Lord Vader and Jabba the Hutt done. And that's just because Tusken Raider and they are both requirements for Lord Vader and Jabba respectively. So you don't want to invest your relics into them until you're ready. It's a good team. I just don't know that it's good enough. There's plenty of counters that exist to this team that I think make it, how do I say this? Regardless of if you're going to you need General Skywalker or, like this team or that team. I just unfortunately think they're just not good enough. They don't, you bring the right team in there and you're not losing anyways. And I know that's a harsh judgment, but you're better off putting those relics into something else, because you do need decent relics on these guys, or else they will lose to things that they should beat. You need some of those relics because before they build up stacks of momentum, they're very squishy. So if your Tusken Chieftain or Warrior get deleted right off the bat, it can be game, set, match before you really get going. So just kind of keep that in mind with them, that I think they're good. They're just not good enough. They're a team that I'd wait. You got Jabba, you got Lord Vader, kind of assess where you're at and if you're ready to invest the relics into them. And for me, it's just been Tusken Warrior sitting in the cantina. I just can't find the time, which sucks. I'd love to do it. I just, good, but not good enough. All right, I'm ready for it. Bring the heat in the comments, but Star Killer is one I would delay. I used to say that this guy was, hey, after your first GL, go get Star Killer. But I think that that's where Inquisitors are starting to step in. Star Killer is great. As much as I love him, I just think he's beginning to show his age a little bit. And that's because of his unique. Hear me out. His unique is great. But again, it's very specific. You've got to have one Jedi, one light side unaligned Force user, one Sith, one other dark side unaligned Force user, and then you gain your bonuses. And again, in Grand Arena, you gain a little bit more. But there is one part of his kit. There's one thing in here that is missing from him that a lot of other characters on his level now have. And that, my friends, is mastery. When you go to, say, Bo-Katan Mandalore, if you look in here, in GAC, gaining 50% mastery. If we go to, say, equivalent to him, Malgus even, right? Malgus. Mastery. Let's go to, and again, I know it's showing a conquest unit, but you guys, I think you're seeing the point that I'm trying to make here. Let's keep going to, where is he? I know he's in here somewhere. Where's Admiral Trench? I know Trench has it in, for Territory Wars too. There's Chrysanthemum. Where's Trench at? Oh, Dark Trooper Moff Gideon will have it too. See in here, go down, mastery, right? Star Killer does not give out mastery. So what that means is that a Relic 8 on Star Killer, comparative to, say, taking a Relic 8 on an enemy Ben Solo inside of a Rey team, that Ben Solo is getting more out of that Relic. So Star Killer is losing a little bit because of mastery and the impact that that has. Now, I'm not saying he's not good, but I think that there's probably some better things to be farming earlier, because while Starkiller's amazing, the one thing that I've noticed a lot of accounts changing in, you don't have the ability to fully take advantage of Kyle Katarn. You don't have the full ability to take advantage of Dash Rendar. I think Darth Talon and Mara Jade, very easy to kind of fit into any team, but these two characters I'm noticing more and more just kind of riding the bench or not really going into teams where they work well. And I think that's just because the way the game has moved along, we're not building some of the things that kind of matched up with these guys. So I think for those reasons, hey, maybe Starkiller needs to be delayed a little bit till you get something else. The other thing to keep in mind here, Starkiller has 3 Cantina nodes. 3 Cantina nodes. 2 16s and a 12. Kyle Katarn's a 12. These guys are 16 energy. To put that into perspective, you go and farm Captain Tarples for Jar Jar. Captain Tarples is on an 8 energy node. The time it takes you to farm Darth Talon, you'll get Captain Tarples. So then you've got all the extra time in Cantina to worry about, hey, I'm going to go get signal data for my Gungans. Now, Kyratech's going to be pretty similar between the Gungans and this team. The one difference, and again, I know I'm using Jar Jar, who's brand new, but you see, I hope you guys see the comparison I'm trying to make there. The reason you need to delay Starkiller is because there's other things in the game that are just as good, if not better. And he's also one that, again, because of his Omicrons, he's useful outside of GAC and Territory Wars, but a lot of additional investment into him to get him ready for Territory Wars with an Omicron to Jahani, an Omicron on Mara Jade, and I think it really makes it a lot more challenging to utilize him compared to something like Bo or Jar Jar, even Cal Kestis right there. I just think he's showing some of his age in the sense of not having the mastery in his kit, and I think he's also his requirements are harder to utilize now with all the changes that have happened with light speed bundles coming into the game, that we're not really building those scoundrels and rebel fighters as early as we should. And even teams like Treya with like Darth Talon. I've seen a lot of players who have Darth Talon, they've got Starkiller, but they don't really have a good Sith team to use her with. So again, I'm just, I know this one's tough to hear because we love Starkiller, but this is a guy that I would probably delay till after you've gotten, I'd say, Grand Inquisitor and potentially even like a Cal, Jar Jar, or Bo. I don't know that you delay him all the way until after all those things because he is very good, but I would definitely try to build something else, or at least have Jahani ready to go so you can say you have a Territory War Omicron. Finally, Sith Eternal. And again, you guys know I don't like this guy. He's the 9th best character in Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. Like, Darth Bane freaking wipes the floor with him. Here's the reason why Sith Eternal needs to be delayed. I'm a big fan of delaying this guy until you get through a lot of other things. So right here, these first 5 characters and TIE Bomber, so 6, they're all required for something else. Emperor Palpatine we get through Supreme Leader Kylo Ren. Darth Vader and Piet go through Executor. Grand Moff Tarkin and Dooku are Lord Vader requirements. If you go farm those other things first, Lord Vader, Executor, Kylo, you're going to have all of these things at or above where you need them for Sith Eternal. Darth Maul is also needed for Leviathan, so now you're at, hey, farmed him, now I've got another requirement done for Sith Eternal. Then you have Sith Marauder, Jedi Knight Anakin, Royal Guard, and Grand Admiral Thrawn. And these guys are basically requirements. You need Sith Marauder to have a good Leviathan fleet. Jedi Knight Anakin, I mean, do I really need to go more? But Qui-Gon Jinn, Padme, Jedi Master Kenobi, wherever you're going to use him, you want him at Relics. He's a fantastic pilot. Royal Guard, you go build Lord Vader, you need Royal Guard. Like, they go hand in hand. And the same thing with Thrawn and Lord Vader. I think Thrawn and Lord Vader are kind of like this. You don't really like to separate them. You'll oftentimes see in 3v3 that the more popular teams are Lord Vader, Maul, Thrawn, or Lord Vader, Royal Guard, Thrawn. Like, Thrawn kind of almost always goes with Lord Vader. So that's basically another requirement, right? So there's 4 other requirements for Sith Eternal that you're basically going to do. Then you've got this argument to be made for Stark and Veers, where you're going to want them at relics at some point because they're fantastic characters, right? Stark going with the Imperial Trooper team with under Iden, Veers creating his own team at some point. So you could have an argument to be made that you'd have these guys at relics, and then it's just farming Director Krennic and farming Darth Sidious, and you're ready for Sith Eternal. So I think with Sith Eternal, it's one of these situations where he could arguably be your 8th Galactic Legend. He could be like your 5th. It just depends which ones you do first. But I think that it's best to back into him. I don't think it's a good decision to utilize your resources to go build Sith Eternal, because with the state of the game now, your Tarkin and Dooku that you're going to have, you're not really going to get to use them with Sith Eternal. Like, you don't, where are you going to use them, right? Tarkin doesn't go with Emperor Palpatine anymore. So what ends up happening is you build a bunch of these characters, and if you don't have, like, Royal Guard, Maul, Tarkin, Dooku, Krennic, Sidious, even, Royal Guard, you don't have the teams to utilize them yet, so they just end up sitting in your bench. So you have all of these characters that you put gear into that are kind of mediocre to get the 9th best character in Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes. So that's why I delay Sith Eternal. I think he's one that, once you've got the rest of that stuff, then think about kind of backing into his Rex. And I've called that out on a bunch of accounts where I've said, now's the time to get Sith Eternal. Like, you have Lord Vader, you have the Leviathan, you have, all these other things. You're missing a couple of Rex. Now's the time to do it. Like, you're close to backing in. That's kind of how you go about this guy, is that once you see that you've kind of got a bunch of this stuff already done, time to farm him. So that's my list, guys. Let me know your thoughts. Do you agree with it? Are you like, Phil, you're a moron, you don't know what you're talking about? But I think especially when I look at Veers and like Starkiller, I did want to say this. If you're still watching, let me know in the comments that you're still watching when Phil went on this rant. But with Veers and Starkiller, the one thing we so often do is we put them on this pedestal because of, again, like I said earlier, of what the top end they can do. Starkiller beats Rey. Veers can clean up Lord Vader. Veers troopers can beat this. Starkiller can beat this. And we give them this, we elevate them to this status that they don't really belong at. But I shouldn't say they don't belong at. We elevate them to this status that they only occupy, a percentage of the time. So you can't value Starkiller and say, this is my Rey counter, because you've got to have everything else to be able to pull that off. And even then, Datacrons, doing what they do best, annoying us all. But I think you've got to look a little bit deeper and say, what is the actual value that this character is giving me? What on a regular basis am I going to be able to use this for? And that's where I think these guys kind of come back down to earth and Iden's value increases. And that's where I think Starkiller, unfortunately, loses a little bit of that value, is that if you can't if you're not consistent at beating Rey with him, what are you using your Starkiller for? And is there a better option? Is there something else you could have in your account that would be better suited? So that's the end of the video. Let me know your thoughts. Love you all. May the Force be with you. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers, my friends.